Someone could connect with the plant once a year, but do so in a way to just forget everything. And in that realm, they're not utilizing the plant in the way it was meant to be utilized, right? On the other hand, someone could utilize it daily and, really allow it to help them meditate deeper, get more in touch with breath work, do integrated family systems work or coaching work. And that could be a really positive force in their life.
And now for something completely different. We are back with another episode of Stillcast with yet another repeat guest. Super excited to hang out with this dude today. He's been an integral piece of my own journey within my subconscious mind, and it's like we got to fuel ourselves, man. But at the same time, when you notice someone out there doing the same thing you are, it's totally cool to take in that fire and feed their fire as well. And so I'm just super grateful to have had the opportunity to meet this man and to learn from him and to call him a friend and a brother, and for him to take the time to speak with us today. But where I wanted to start with Ryan today, and so to give you a little bit of background, if you haven't heard the other episode that I did with Ryan, he's got decades of research in the cannabis category. Even went to a cannabis school, which I didn't even know was a thing. He owns his own cannabis company, and if I'm not mistaken, offers all the different varieties, has locations and stuff like that, highly optimized. Also has Breathe with Cannabis, which is something he's been doing for a little while now, alongside of something synchronous for me, alongside of a fellow named Aaron Abke. And before social media was as big as it is, when I first started looking out in the world for answers and ideas of where to turn, I came across Aaron Abke and Aaron Doherty, I think was the other Aaron. There was two Aarons. But I always really liked Aaron Abke. And then Ryan's like, hey, I'm working with Aaron Abke. I'm like, no shit. And so I got to experience that last week. And, if you're someone that is willing to push past the resistance of the unconscious shame that, circulates society around the globe, and you're willing to try to utilize cannabis for your rewire journey, I urge you to consider going to one of these events that Ryan and his team with Aaron and Chris put on. They do breathing techniques and meditation and introspective journaling prompts, and it's just such a good vibe. They play really good music. I think they sent out the playlist. I really wanted to get that playlist. But the one thing that's really, I'm really talking the beginning of this, but the one thing that's really I really like about this connection is that he's doing very similar to what I'm doing, and that is helping people realize that we can get rid of this unconscious shame, go within, not only around the plant, but around our life, and gradually liberate ourselves, and that cannabis can actually be a fantastic fucking tool for that process. But today, I wanted to dive into a little bit more in depth with, terpenes and THC levels and all that stuff for the individual that realizes this and is utilizing cannabis, things to look out for, things to be mindful of, and God knows wherever else we'll go. But the first place that I wanted to start was with relation to, the frequency of indulgence and also the level of THC content. I think it was you that mentioned to me, how many scientific experiments have been done around cannabis with a group of participants that are mindful, that practice meditation, that, all of the things. There's so many things, not just meditation, obviously. And I think that that's a limited supply of studies, if I'm not mistaken. But from your perspective, your study, your research, and I know you recently connected with someone you'll tell us more about, in terms of the frequency of indulgence and the amount of tolerance, if someone is mindful and they are acting in joy and love and they're working on their passion and they're getting their time in nature and exercising, do you see any detrimental effects from consistent use? And lastly, thank you, bro, for being here.
Dude, first of all, thank you for that epic intro, bro. That was so fun. I'm so excited to dive into all this stuff. And yeah, I think that the main theme that I speak on, which it's really cool, man, to have met you, because there's no one out there talking about this specific niche in cannabis, right? And really what I see you and I doing is being warriors actually for the cannabis plant. And this isn't to talk down on anyone else, but how many people do we still hear saying cannabis can be detrimental? Cannabis can be positive, right? All of these things, right? When in reality, the only thing that allows an objective plant growing in nature to be perceived as good or bad, which those don't even exist, they're just a duality made in the mind. But let's entertain the idea they do exist. Anything that makes something good or bad is just thinking and how we act with that aspect of life, right? Whether it's cannabis, a romantic partner, a food, a drug, whatever it is, right? Like we are the element of the equation that does not get talked about nearly enough. And when you look into coaching, when you look into any type of empowerment, it all talks about taking radical responsibility for your life. So when I look at the world of cannabis today, right, it's a microcosm that really can be expanded into the macrocosm of what I see wrong with the world right now, is that people are failing to take responsibility for their end of the bargain, their part in the equation, right? So when people ask me like, is cannabis good or bad? I'm like, I don't know. What's the person who's utilizing the plant? What are their stories? What are their belief systems? Why are they going to the plant, right? There are so many things that we don't really account for in studies, because think about it, right? White bread is on the fucking food pyramid here in America, right? So how can we expect the people that put that into the food pyramid to then do research that someone like me or you, someone who's practicing a highly optimized lifestyle, using red lights, saunas, cold plunging, acupuncture, chiro, massage, doing what they love in life, having beautiful romantic interests, having amazing friendships, right? Like, how can we, someone that does all of those things, trust the people that say white bread is supposed to be in the food pyramid? So when I hear people like Andrew Huberman, who have obviously never been in the room with a smoking joint in their life, right? Like, talk about these kind of things as, oh, cannabis can do these things that are terrible. Cannabis can do these things, and just fear mongering. I look at another person who, although very intellectually smart, completely misses the entire equation, right? Like, at the end of the day, what I didn't like about that episode, and this is getting to your point of frequency, is that he was speaking about all these potential damaging things of cannabis. Oh, your lungs might get hurt. Oh, you might have, trouble in your frontal cortex or any of these kind of things, right? Never did he talk about the fact that, well, you might also become enlightened. Well, you might also connect deeper with yourself and your romantic interests and the people you love in life. And you might realize that the rat race isn't all there is in life. You might realize that actually all you need is some good friends around a fire to have a really good time. You might get more in touch with nature, right? Like, again, like he's looking at a plant as if the plant is holding a gun to people's head and making them do quote unquote bad things with it, right? Like, at the end of the day, the plant is just a plant growing in nature. And so what we choose to do with it is completely our responsibility. And so when it comes to frequency, this is something that a lot of people ask me. And if you see my content, for anyone out there, I will say certain things about this. I'll say, hey, if you can't take 3 days off of cannabis, it owns you, right? Or rather, you're owning yourself in that relationship, right? Like, you're using it as some type of escape mechanism, a pacifier, etc. But that isn't to say that someone always needs to take 3 days off every week to be in a healthy relationship with the plant. Someone could connect with the plant once a year, but do so in a way to just forget everything. And in that realm, they're not utilizing the plant in the way it was meant to be utilized, right? On the other hand, someone could utilize it daily and, really allow it to help them meditate deeper, get more in touch with breath work, do integrated family systems work or coaching work. And that could be a really positive force in their life. And I think that one of the ultimate challenges within this space is that people assume that if you're, let's say, connecting with cannabis daily, that you're an addict or that you're not a productive member of society. But at the same time, those people will drink coffee every day, utilize nicotine, potentially pornography, potentially sugar, etc. And so at this point in my life, I look at it like this. I'm like, guys, clearly in my own life, I've been able to practice what I preach when it comes to healthy living, really showing up for yourself, etc. If someone like me, or like Paul Chek's another example, Paul Chek's mostly a daily user. But again, the reason he does that is because it helps him get more in touch with himself at the end of the day. And what he does is he allows it to help him commune with his soul. Not that he needs it to do that, but let's think of it this way, right? If you're someone especially like a you or a me or a Paul Check, right? That's really driven in the world, right? Really driven, really motivated. Maybe wasn't always that way. I definitely wasn't always that way, but I've been able to cultivate something and take radical responsibility for my life where I'm really passionate about what I put out in the world. Well, sometimes, right, to do that, to be able to reach as many people as I want to reach, to be able to put the programs together that I want to put together, sometimes that's a lot of thugging it out, right? Just like my shirt says, thugging it out. And so in that, right, like I don't want to always have to rely on cannabis to be able to relax, but there are some times where I might do a lot during the day, and it can be really challenging when I'm going at that rate of speed to calm myself down naturally at night. So there are times where I'll utilize cannabis knowing full well I don't need it to do this. I'm aware that maybe I'm doing a little too much, but right now that's a season that I'm in. And so I might utilize the plant to do that instead of sleeping pills, anti-anxiety medication, SSRIs, or any of the things that are actually damaging. At the end of the day, cannabis is a natural plant. And the fact that there are so many people out there talking about how cannabis is the worst thing ever is ridiculous, because at the end of the day, can people do challenging things with it? Can they become dependent on it? Can they completely blame the plant for why they're not showing up in their life? Yes, but that's not the fault of cannabis, right? Cannabis is here to support us, just like any and every other plant and fungi is here to support us. And the people that are trying to go through life saying this is objectively bad, this is objectively good, obviously have no idea with regards to hermetics or quantum physics, right? Because if they did, they'd realize that the universe is mental, right? Like there is no inherent thing as good or bad. It's just whatever our belief systems and stories say. When we're able to move past that, we're able to look at anything as, is it good or bad for me in this moment, right? Is this a calling or is this a craving? And that is true freedom, my man, right? Like, the whole AA thing, we've talked about this, right? Like, hey, for anyone out there that likes AA, awesome. Glad it works for you. Just never resonated with me, because for me, going to the opposite end of a polarity, let's say I'm dependent, and then I decided to be, okay, I'm going to be sober. Well, that's just polarity to polarity, right? The freedom happens in the middle, because the freedom is the challenging part. The freedom is actually when you have to really use discernment and enact discipline and really get clear with yourself on why you're craving this plant, if you're craving it. And that's the more challenging discussion that a lot of people just don't know how to have, because we really are just completely ass backwards from diet to mental health care to everything. So yeah, man, it's pretty crazy.
Beautiful. Beautiful. So the good or bad thing, I feel like expounding on, I know what you're saying and I'm with you all the way, but for that person who's like, well, you fucking blah, blah, blah right now, so I think what we're driving at here is that if you take yourself out of your singular perceived reality and look at the world from a global perspective, any individual thing that is happening, no matter how we perceive it to be small or big, in the grand scope of the existence of fucking everything, that's where you got to come out to, because when you're down low, it's all those stories. It's all those subconscious stories we don't even realize that are there until you start doing this work, and then you realize it's there. Now, one more thing I wanted to touch on with the Huberman thing, I agree with you to a great degree. I think he's obviously super, super knowledgeable, and I actually have on one of my playlists an interview with him talking about some good stuff not related to cannabis. But I think that, like, alongside of him and all those other people out there that have that vantage point of like cannabis is bad, it's negative or whatever, they're still operating from that inner child space that's trying to prove their validation, etc., that's trying to do good and stuff. And for a lot of people, that fucking works. There's a lot of people that have successful lives that are driven from that place. And I would say to some degree, that's part of what drives me. But I think that, like, that part where it's like, you guys are wrong, and blah, 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 and then coming back to what you were saying about, like, and I think it was you that brought this up to me, and I'm like, yeah, it's a fucking good point. It's like, when you look at all of the tests that are out there that may paint in a negative light with regard to health, it's like, people that have severe PTSD, for instance, from the war and stuff, if they're using cannabis to cope and to disconnect, well, that's different. Where are the tests that have thousands of people, or even fucking 100 people, whatever, that are like yourself, myself, Paul Check, and doing this work to some degree, and the work, it's like the work is the only word that we know to use to describe it. It's not really that hard once you get doing the stuff. It becomes a part of you, and it fucking is so good to have be a part of you. right?
Mm.
When you're in that space, I see no negative, but I'm curious to dive deeper into that in terms of, the difference between the cannabis that was made back in the 70s in your neighbor's backyard versus the stuff that's got all the stuff in it now. And I know that there are people, the medicinal places like here in Florida, they go through a shit ton of studies and make sure everything's dialed in and perfect, and it's more better it's better than like FDA approved or whatever shit, I would think. But still, you wonder, when you take that into account.
Yeah. Dude, what I'll say on this is another area where people have missed the mark. Because think about it, right? Like, we live in a very scientific materialism world, right? Like, the last 3 years has proven one thing. Whenever anyone came out, right, and tried to say something different than the mainstream narrative, someone would always say, well, show me the science, right? They didn't realize that the science in this country and most of the world these days is bought and paid for from vested interests with people that have biases against things, right? Cannabis only became illegal in this country because people in the nylon, the rope, and the cotton industries got together and were like, ooh, hemp is going to really fuck us up if we don't do something about that. So let's invent this myth that, Mexicans are coming over the border and raping white women with this new plant called marijuana. And we won't tell people it's cannabis because they knew at that point cannabis was a part of like 85% of all medications. So we'll invent this narrative and we'll just get fear into people. And that's really how this all started in this country, right? And I think that's important for people to understand because it can be quite a red pill to swallow down to realize that, like, this didn't start, or never in the history of a government have they actually cared about the people, right? So whenever you start hearing the government say, we care about you, start really getting your bullshit meter going off, right? Because there's no world in which the government cares about you, right? Or the powers that be. They just don't. They're a business. And it doesn't make them bad people. It's just that's the game they play. But, when it comes to, all of this conversation around amounts and things like that, I'll tell you how they miss the mark. Because what they're looking for are only quantitative metrics, right? So they're saying, okay, we're testing for mold and there's no mold. Awesome. It's great to make sure there's no mold in there. We're testing for heavy metals, making sure there's no heavy metals in there. Awesome. That's great too. We're testing for cannabinoid and terpene levels so that people can be aware of what they're connecting with. Great. You know what they missed in that? Who grew the medicine?
Mm-hmm.
Are there, invisible frequencies like EMFs and radio waves that are polluting the biofield of these plants? What is the energy of the people that are cultivating it, right? Like, how are they coming to work each day? How are they being treated at work? What's the intention of the entire company? Why is it there, right? It's the same way as, people that want to argue meat is good or bad, right? Well, it's like, for me as a meat eater, right? Like, I look at it as like, okay, well, how can I practice harm reduction? I completely agree that buying factory farm meat is completely ridiculous. I would never do it. I would stop eating meat before I ever did it. And at the same time, though, I'm aware that, like, the cycle of nature, right, that we've been existing within millions of years is the cycle of life, right? So when we look at cannabis, right, it's like, how do we mitigate harm? And so when we look into this issue, it's like there's not really like a perfect answer for how these corporations, these big companies that are not meditators, not into breath work typically, not into any of this, we can't expect them to just all of a sudden believe all of us and totally get into that, right? And if you try to wait for that, you're going to, good luck, right? Like, you're going to be waiting until the cows come home. So what do? This is why I always teach people how to grow their own, because when you look into shamanic societies and in these kind of cultures, it was very important that you grew your own medicine, right? If you look into the adventures of Don Juan, that's one of the first things he finds when he goes and visits Don Juan. He starts asking him about peyote and all of these different, medicines that Don Juan would work with. And Don Juan starts explaining these two medicines called the weed, which is not cannabis, it's some other mixture, and the smoke. And he's like, awesome, man, let me try some of these out. And Don Juan's like, whoa, dude, slow your roll. Like, you got to grow these yourself. If you use mine, it's not going to work. So somewhere along the way, we got way more into the left brain, linear, logical, analytical thinking, and we lost a lot of that connection to the unseen worlds. And when you look at Jamie Wheel's book, Recapture the Rapture, he talks about this too, how we're right now in society going through a meaning crisis. And so again, it's like people can look at like, oh my God, more people are addicted to cannabis than ever. Or you could actually look at the real issue. It's like, why are people choosing to disconnect from themselves? Well,
Yeah.
probably because they don't know who they are. They have no idea why they're here. And the only mainstream narrative is, hey, you're here. Don't really ask any questions about it, except if you go to church on Sunday and you can go give them some money if you want. And then, hey, make sure you get a good job. And if you produce, right, you're able to drink some beers at the end of the night and life is good. And if you do it right, you'll be able to retire at 65, 70 now, actually, because they updated the retirement age. And you'll have a few good years to go travel the world and, use your pension that you might get.
And
Maybe, right?
make sure to support your local sports team.
Yeah, exactly. Make sure to have all the distractions possible to focus on other people's lives instead of your own. And again, like, I'm not
Nothing
going to
against
tell
sports.
anyone.
Nothing against
Yeah,
sports.
exactly. Like, there's nothing bad about sports. Once again, right? It's just that it's the same thing as cannabis. Like, are you utilizing sports once, twice a week? You're getting with friends. You're having a good time. Or are you just like, I'm fucking done with my marriage. I don't want to do shit. And I'm just watching sports clips every night, right?
Yeah.
Same thing with cannabis, right? Am I utilizing the plant to get more in touch with myself, to get more clear on who I am, to get more clear on what trauma I want to transcend through? Or am I just using it at the end of the night because I fucking hate my life and I just don't want to think about it, right? Like, that's the thing that we're not really talking about. And when it comes into the quality of cannabis, it's another huge aspect of it, because just like in the meat industry, what do we know now that is actually science backed? That if we eat meat that was raised in one of these horrible factory farming scenarios, not only is that absolutely fucking terrible for the animals, right? But that stress, that anxiety, that fear that those animals go through gets uploaded into their actual meat. And then we eat it, and we then upload ourselves with that frequency. We are what we eat, and we're also what we eat.
I'd like to butt in here. So now,
please.
I've heard of this before, but are you saying that there's some kind of science around there that shows this?
Yeah. There's a couple studies out now talking about this. And there's actually a guy named Joe Patitucci, who's the only guy I know of that's done this with plants. And what he's done, because here's the thing, right? Like, if we understand this, right, at least in the health community, I'm sure like the average person probably isn't aware of the science, but if in the health communities we're talking about this stuff, right? Well, why are there so many people saying that vegetarianism or veganism, and I'm not going on a soapbox here, but like, why are they saying that all of a sudden killing plants isn't a big deal too? Because they're living beings also, right? Now, again, people can choose whatever they want. I'm not here to tell people what diet is right. But I am here to draw attention to the fact of, like, if we know this happens with animals, why isn't it similar with plants? Now, maybe they're on a different consciousness level, but everything here is alive. And that's why I think that,
dude, you're on a roll, man. But have you seen the videos with the plant wave thing where they hook it up and you can hear the different music they're playing and shit?
Yes, dude. Joe Patitucci has done this with a cannabis plant. Yeah. Yep. I heard him on Aubrey Marcus about 6 years ago or 5 years ago, and I had already been tapping into this because when I grow cannabis, and I've been a cultivator for 14 years, you can tell, right? Like, you walk into your room and you can tell right away if something's off with your plants. Like, one of the times that I can draw attention to is I walked into my room and I had recently sexed some plants of mine, right? Which, for anyone listening, means that, like, I had taken a little leaf clipping, sent it out, and figured out beforehand if they were male or female. That way I can call the males, because for anyone listening who doesn't know, you don't want males in your garden. They'll seed your whole crop. So I had genetically tested them, found all the females, had transplanted them, and I went on vacation for a week. When I come back, I'd put them in a flower before I left. When I come back, I walk into the room, and immediately I can just tell something's off, right? Plants looked fine. Everything looked fine, but I was like, something feels weird in here, right? So I start watering my plants, and then all of a sudden, boom, I see it. Somehow, there was a male that got into my garden, and it was starting to spawn ball sacks, right? So all my females were kind of like, what's going on in here, right? Not that he's not supposed to be in there. That's a human thing, right? I'm calling the males. But I know for me, I could feel like something is off in here. And so again, what I'm drawing to there is a feeling that's not science, not logic, etc. It's the same thing talked about in every spiritual doctrine since the dawn of time, right? Intuition, clairsenses, these kind of things. Things like telepathy have so much more science behind them than even Advil or any of these things, right? So that's why I tell everyone, like, you got to look into this stuff, right? You got to figure out where these studies on cannabis are coming from, who they're funded by, etc.
And so watch Third Eye Spies, the documentary, remote viewing, Like,
dude. I mean, all the evidence the CIA has on it, it's pretty crazy, man. But, again, it's like, what do we do about this, right? What do we do about the fact that most people are going to dispensaries, they're buying cannabis that, yes, it's awesome, might be clean from mold, heavy metals, great step in the right direction, but are missing this complete aspect of the spiritual side of a plant medicine, right? Like, we're not talking about the spiritual side of oregano. We're talking about the spiritual side of one of the most spiritually inclined plants ever on earth, right? It's almost like I saw a clip the other day I thought was really funny. It was a comedian talking about how microdosing is the worst thing to happen to psilocybin ever. And he was talking about the reason why is like, he's like, guys, you mean to tell me that we have access to a mushroom that can help us remember that we are God, but we're using them in small amounts to be able to work with the man better? He's like, this is ridiculous, right? Like, he's like, why are we doing this? You know, like, and so again, like when we look into this, you know, I think the best option is to be able to really understand how to cultivate your own medicine if you can. And if you can't, right, there are definitely things that I'd recommend. And for anyone who's not deep in the qualitative realm, this might be a little weird, but I recommend a modality called biogeometry. They have two things. I can get them actually. One's right here. This is the, I'll actually get this too. So you can buy this for about $10. This is what's called the clearing tray. And so if you don't know about biogeometry, this is going to be the most woo-woo stuff you've heard recently. I highly recommend, instead of me going into an expose on it, look up Dr. Robert Gilbert on Living 4D with Paul Chek. His first episode, he just came on again. He is incredible. And he's like one of the smartest guys I've ever met that talks about biogeometry. But basically, I look at the clearing tray like sage, right? So you can put your cannabis on here and it will neutralize all of the energy within it, right? Make it inert, essentially. Then you want to use what's called the charging plate, which you can also get, I think it's like $40. And this is going to upload that medicine or anything on it, your food, water, coffee, whatever, with an energy quality called BG3, which we can't see with our eyes, but we can actually measure and test for. And that's why I tell everyone, don't take my word for it. Look into biogeometry. It might sound woo, but it has so much qualitative science behind it and, you know, double-blind placebo-controlled studies behind it. It's really cool stuff. And so that's what I would do, because I think that one of the challenges is that the cannabis of today, people have latched on to this Delta 9 or THCA, technically, and consumers have decided this is what they want. Now, when we look at the fact that we're farther away from real human nature than ever, right? We're working jobs we don't like, driving in cars we can't afford to these jobs, et cetera, the whole thing down the line, it makes sense why we would want to ramp up the aspect of cannabis that is a dissociate. That is something that's going to relieve pain, right? Like it's showing us as a society where we're at. But again, at the end of the day, THCA is just one aspect of cannabis. It's one aspect of the full spectrum experience. And so I think a lot of people have failed to realize that the way in which cannabis was intended to be connected with was much more full spectrum. And so all of these reasons, right? Like who's growing your medicine, you have no idea. What are they growing it in? Outdoor, indoor, with EMF, lights, all that kind of stuff. And then also the aspect of just all the cannabis is pretty much the same these days. It's all just super high THC, Girl Scout cookie, lineage stuff. And again, if you like that, cool, whatever. There's always an argument for high THC if you have cancer or something like that. But, you know, at the end of the day, if you want some real good variety, get into companies like Ace Seeds, go get some heirloom and landrace genetics, grow one in your backyard if it's legal where you live, and just have fun with it. You know, that's how this all started for me. I grew one plant from a bag seed and I became hooked on it. It was just amazing, you know? So gets you back to nature. It's all these things that are so much more than just cultivating your own medicine. So that's what I would say.
It's beautiful. So then, you know, since I have access to the Florida medicinal, you know, locations and stuff, I am not dialed in, and I'd like to learn a little bit more from you if we have time here today on like, you know, terpenes and THC percentage and all that stuff. You know, so when you grow it yourself, you're not going to get your, like, so for you, your stuff, you don't grow stuff that's 24%, whatever, THC or where's your stuff at?
No. So again, you'll have phenotypic variation. So like, for instance, right, if I throw 10 seeds down of like Ghost Train Haze, right, I'll just use as an example. You might get one pheno or two phenos, right? Ghost Train Haze is actually a bad example because that usually is high THC. Let's use like a China Youngin, right? China Youngin from Ace Seeds. So let's say you throw down 10 of those seeds. You might get 8 or 9 that are between 13 and 18%. You might get one, though, that's up around 24. So you're going to have that phenotypic variation. But for me, I've found over time that I always just go on what I like in terms of experience. Like if I did that pheno hunt, what I would do is I would grow all those out. I would clone them all because I wouldn't know until I tried the flower and which one I liked most. And then I would go on experience, right? I would give myself like, okay, this day I'm just going to connect with China Youngin number 1, right? So I try that out. I take some notes on it. I ask myself, how did I feel in terms of mental acuity? How did I feel in terms of relaxation? Like, what are all the high points, pardon the pun for me, that I'm
Mhm.
looking for as an individual that this plant either hit or did not hit. And then what I'll do is after those 10, I'll go, ooh, number 8 was the one. Like, that's the one. So now from this point forward, I'll just keep cloning number 8. And I don't even really look at test results, like, right? Like, I don't even really like, I could test my stuff. I've done it before. There's a
Uh-huh.
great lab here in Boston, but these days I just go based on experience,
Yeah. Yeah.
and that's like, again, what people like Andrew and people like that just make me chuckle about is that it's like clearly you've never had the experience, right? You're talking from a study, which again is bought and paid for from whoever else. And so at the end of the day, like that's how I choose to grow my medicine. Now, this doesn't mean that you can't grow inside, right? I talked about grow lights, things like that. That's why you want to utilize biogeometry.
Mhm.
Biogeometry is amazing at harmonizing EMF and radio waves, not blocking them because you don't want to block them, harmonizing them back into harmony, right?
Mhm.
And so you can have your cake and eat it too, right? Like you can have technology and Wi-Fi and all these things, but you can be safe in doing it. You
Mhm.
can grow plants inside if you're somewhere like Boston and you can't grow in the winter, and you can make sure that it's not having a detrimental effect on your final medicine. That's why I enjoy things like biogeometry, because I'm not here to tell people that, oh, we're far away from human nature, we need to get back to caves. But it's just like, hey, we got to figure out how to work with all of this new stuff in society today.
Beautiful. All right. So let's do a two-part thing here.
Mm,
So someone who is, realizing, okay, I'm going to start being mindful of my relationship with cannabis,
mm,
right? I'm going to start doing all the stuff. Maybe
mm.
I'm going to download Phil's guide, or maybe I'm going to go hang out with Ryan for Breathe with Cannabis. Ryan also has a guide. I'm going to start working on this stuff,
Heck
right?
yeah.
But here's the two different scenarios. One, the individual has access to a medicinal store where they can go and look at the percentages and all that. Two, a person does not have that, right? And in
Mm,
their state, for instance, they got to call whoever or text whoever
yeah.
down the street and hope that
Joe
they answer
Schmo.
and
Yeah.
all that shit, right? So let's go to the first one first. What would you advise them if they're going to go on the road? What to look for at the cannabis store? What
Mm,
what would you say is the best type of strand to utilize and
mm.
be mindful of with terpenes and whatever?
No, this is great. So if this person is a new user and maybe they're a little anxious or nervous around it, what I would actually recommend is going through my buddy Len May, who does DNA testing for cannabis. So,
Oh,
like, what a lot of people get nervous about, right, is they're like, I've heard cannabis can cause psychosis or schizophrenia. Spoiler alert, it doesn't. But let's say someone has that fear. Well, there is a certain person that could have a predisposition to psychosis, but in this person, cannabis wouldn't be the only thing that could trigger it, right? I think that's the misbelief that people have. But
hmm
they could go get a test and see if they have a mutation in their AKT1 gene, which
hmm
would illuminate for them, not that they can't utilize cannabis, but hey, you're going to want to go for strains on a very high THCA level, right?
hmm
So this can be a little more tactful for those people that do have a little bit more nerves with it. Like I always tell everyone, use discernment, make sure this plant is right for you because it's not right for everyone, the same way that pretty much nothing is okay for everyone except maybe food of some sort and water and air. But at
hmm
the end of the day, if they're a new user and they're nervous, that's what I would say to do, right? Go do that. And Len will help you, right? He'll help you, like, you'll see in your chart, like, all the terpenes that will work best for you, the ratios, like, should I go for a 1-to-1, a 2-to-1? What even are those, right? Like, it can be a great place to start. Now, let's say that you're someone who goes to the dispensary pretty often, you're a seasoned cannabis user,
And
and
now
now
you're
you're
going to
looking
start. Now you're going to start
exactly,
doing the mind stuff. Right. Right.
exactly.
Mhm.
So for that kind of individual, I would experiment, right? I might go there and grab 1 gram of 7 to 10 different types. And I would give yourself a ceremony maybe a couple times a week. You could even do it every day if you want to, right? I'm not here to make rules for anyone, but make sure that, like, when you do it, you haven't connected with any other strain that day. You want to be fresh for
Mhm.
each strain each day. And
Mhm.
then what you want to do is you want to take notes on, what did this plant open up for me, right? If anything, right? Did I feel like it really worked well with me? Because every plant is like a different spirit. It's like human beings, right? Like,
Mhm.
I have a lot of friends, but I have a lot of people that I know we just don't really get along. It's okay. It doesn't make them a bad person. It doesn't make me a bad person. We're just not the flavor of ice cream for each other. So
Mhm.
cannabis is very similar, right? Like, a lot of people will say, oh, dude, I love Jack Harar, right? Like, why is that? Well, on some level, that plant really works for their endocannabinoid system's needs, right? And their overall needs of their body. So you don't know that unless you experiment. So I'm a
Mhm.
big fan of experimentation, especially with as many strains as out these days. It's pretty crazy. So I would go to the store, I would grab a bunch of different types, and I would start taking notes on which strains you really just felt in alignment with, what they brought out of you. And before that, I would get clear on what you're actually looking for in cannabis, right? Like if you're someone who's been connecting with it or not connecting with it, regardless, and now you're choosing to have a more mindful relationship with it, the first question is why, right? Like, why are you choosing to start a new pattern here? Why are you choosing to have a new relationship with this plant? What would a great success, what would a life-changing experience with cannabis look like for you? If you don't get clear on those things, it doesn't mean that cannabis might give you something that's 10 times better, but if you don't at least have some type of quantitative metric, well, how do you expect the plant to know how to help you, or for you to know if the plant has supported you, you know? And so that's what I would suggest, is to go to the store, grab a bunch of different types, and just really experiment. And if you're a new user, start with a test if you're nervous, right? Like this is one of the best parts of technology. We don't need to just fingers cross it anymore. We can allow, ourselves to mitigate harm and mitigate any type of risk by doing our due diligence beforehand.
What about the intention, in terms of like if the reflection is what am I really doing this for? And maybe they don't come to something, but then they go, okay, well, I'm not certain what it is, but my intention is I want to be more mindful. I want to meditate with this, or I want to go for a bike ride with it, or I want to reflect on, my yesterday or last year in a positive way, or whatever it is like that. My intention is I'm going to utilize cannabis in this way, so they can make that executive decision.
Yeah, 100%. Like I think that sometimes we don't know the exact answer, right? Like, for me sometimes, right, it's more qualitative. It's more of like a feeling. Like maybe I'm just feeling this feeling in my solar plexus or something. And this has been a recent thing for me. Maybe I'm just feeling this thing and I'm not really sure what it is. And maybe my ego, my default mode network are trying to quote unquote protect me from feeling whatever that is, not knowing, because the ego and default mode network don't have the whole story, that all they're doing is just pushing off the inevitable, right? Because the only way to heal is to feel. And so with cannabis, maybe you don't exactly know what you're looking to get out of it, but you know that you're looking to get something like clarity, or you have a feeling that you're looking to get some more awareness on, right? Or something like that. That's a great place to start. Think about like, what am I feeling into in this plant? What am I looking to do with it? Meditate, breath work, etc. And what would be something that would be some sort of positive change, right? Maybe it's I would laugh a little bit, right? Like maybe sometimes you don't really know. Sometimes, for instance, right, like on the other side, you might get into a challenge with your romantic partner and you might feel as though maybe you have a block. So you might be very specific. Cannabis can work in either fashion. The biggest thing is making sure that we just stay open to it. And the great thing about this is, I've always said that cannabis can teach us a lot about our lives. It's really like cannabis can help us become better meditators and become more present in life, because with cannabis, we're going to open up the subconscious. And to the degree we try to run from that is the degree we'll come out of it saying cannabis made me anxious and made me paranoid, not realizing that we just don't know how the plant works. But, like when we actually allow that subconscious to come up, sometimes the only option is to feel it and sit there, right? And so with meditating, it's the same thing, right? You're going to be thinking and then come back to the present moment, thinking, come back to the present moment. So with cannabis, it allows you to just sit in the uncomfortable feelings, sometimes the very comfortable feelings, right? Because it can be either side. But being able to do that, I think, is the best way to be able to create this more mindful relationship with the plant. Because what does mindfulness even say, right? It's I'm being aware of what I am doing and why I'm doing it. So maybe you're not aware, right? Like maybe you're noticing you're in a pattern of a dependency and you're not aware, right? Like for people like this, what I always say is for the next 10 days, every time you connect with cannabis, don't even try to stop. Don't even try to cut back, nothing. If you're listening to this and you're feeling like I'm attacked, right? Like all you do is every time before you connect, start asking yourself why and be honest with yourself. Like, I'm bored. I don't know. Like it can be anything, right? And then start looking for correlations. Like, wow, 70% of the time it looks like I'm smoking because I don't want to think about my job. That's interesting. I wouldn't have noticed that, right? So even if you don't know what your intention is, you can start looking for the whys and start drawing what the intention behind the veil may be over time and what you may be looking to get out of the medicine, or what your soul might be looking to get out of it. It might be beneath where you can currently access in your subconscious. So yeah.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful. All right. I'm just trying to be mindful of time, but I got something I want to ask you, man. So all right. So let's to cap that up, or to wrap that one up, right? So they find the plant that they like, but maybe in the next week that they don't got that plant anymore, right? So now it's like, okay, well, I like this plant. Do you then check that certificate of analysis, look for certain terpenes and shit, and be like, well, I'll try to get this? Or do you think you're just back to the drawing board again? You know.
I think it's 50-50. Like, I think that yes, quantitative metrics like test results can definitely like allow us to at least have some type of idea or some type of experiment we can run. Like maybe you're like, hey, this strain I really enjoyed was high in limonene and terpinolene. So
Mhm.
maybe you find a strain that has a different THCA amount, but it's high in limonene and terpinolene. All right, try experimenting, right? Maybe you'll notice like, oh shit, yeah, it seems to be like over time I'm noticing that strains high in these terpenes are really what I enjoy. Or
Mhm.
maybe what you find is you go for another strain high in limonene or terpinolene, and you realize, oh, that must not have been the characteristic that made the other strain a
Mhm.
really good one for me. And
Mhm.
this is part of the reason, too, that I always stress cultivating your own medicine, because that's one of the things, right? Like, there's infinite different varieties these days. And when you go to a store, you're kind of like stuck with whatever they have, you know?
Mhm.
And depending on what state you're in, you might only be able to go to one store if you're in the medical program, which is
Mhm.
still ridiculous to me that they make you do that. But again, it's like, you know, if you're cultivating your own, you can make sure that not only are you growing the same strain, but the same pheno of that strain, the same
Mhm.
genetic expression of that actual genotype. And so that's another reason I always recommend growing if you can.
Okay, beautiful.
Mhm.
And then for the person who, hey, this state, they frown on it. I grew up in a city, and I think they've kind of legalized it in Georgia now a little bit. But I grew up around a county called Cobb County, and it
Mm.
was count on being busted. That was the acronym. You know what I mean?
That's what I
And
know
so,
about
like,
Georgia.
for someone who lives in a place like that, where there's, man, you got to have a little unconscious shame there around the plant too,
Mm,
because it's illegal and all the stuff.
mm.
What's a good advice do you think for that individual?
Look at the people that are trying to make you feel shame. Straight
So
up.
okay,
Like,
that I fucking love that. But in terms of the going forward with cannabis, if
yeah, of
they're in a
course.
space where they're not ready to let go of it, like what do you think is good to be mindful of? And
Yeah,
do all the
100%.
things, do all the stuff, download a guide, work on
Oh,
yourself,
yeah.
please. But yeah.
Yeah. And I think there's two parts to this, right? Like, obviously the ultimate answer to it is you got to love yourself to a degree where you can really just make decisions based on what you feel is good or bad for you, not based on anyone else's stories or belief systems. But I think the other bigger thing too, and why I mentioned the first thing is, if you look at the people that are trying to make you feel shame around this and you really ask yourself, like, okay, these people that are telling me that cannabis is bad, that I should feel shameful around it, etc. This could be members of society, your
Mhm.
parents, friends, etc. Right? It doesn't have to be just like politicians and people like that, but it can
Yeah.
include those people too. And this isn't to judge anyone or to look down on them. But if we look at the people that are typically doing these things and we really ask ourselves, if we're loving human beings, do we want the results that person is getting? Do we
Mhm.
want to be listening to someone who is actively shaming others for what they're choosing to do with their own body, right? We're going to find that if we want to actually be empowered individuals, leaders in the world, etc., we don't want those results. So why would we listen to them,
Yeah.
right? And this is part of like the matrix in real life of realizing that a lot of the people, like the same people that put white bread on the food pyramid, are the people that you look at when they're on a screen and you're like, this is the person giving me health advice. Like, why would I ever listen to them? Right. And so it's really important that we wield discernment in today's age and start asking ourselves where this shame, where this guilt is coming from. Because I think for many of us, we think it's just inherent, right? We think that it's true. We believe into it. And that's why I'm telling everyone, like, look into, get curious as to where this is coming from. Because,
Right.
like I tell everyone, I don't care if anyone thinks cannabis is the best thing ever or the worst thing ever, so long as they have come to that conclusion on their own.
Yeah.
And what you'll find is that 99.999% of people that have a warped view around cannabis will just tell you where they heard that cannabis was a bad thing. They won't actually tell you their own experiences with it. They won't tell you any of that. And so that's
And
what I would say is
99% of the time, those individuals are doing something like drinking Starbucks coffee every day, or they're,
exactly,
whatever it is, it's got a whole bunch.
exactly.
There's other shit. They're eating the white bread,
Yeah,
whatever it is,
yeah,
right? So,
exactly. And that's the thing, right? Is that like at the end of the day, we're living in a very weird time where it's very challenging to be a human being right now. And the only reason why is because we are so far away from our typical state of being, our connection to nature, etc., that when we go around shaming people for their coping strategies, it's like, again, right? Like, people don't get hermetics, as within, so without, right? The people that are telling you don't do this are the people that are feeling that to themselves.
yeah,
That's all it is. And that's what you got to
that's
look
it.
out for. Anyone
Mhm.
hurt people, right?
Yeah.
Anyone telling you that you're wrong, anyone telling you
Judging you.
that you should feel shameful, etc., is just a
Mhm.
hurting individual that is
Mhm.
unaware of them like projecting that outwards.
Mhm.
And this is why it's like, it's so important to be a highly optimized individual in today's world, because it's not just about having a good body. It's not about even health. It's about being able to be at a level of consciousness where
Mhm.
you can sift through all of this nonsense,
Yeah.
like the idea that a plant is somehow okay and totally fine on one imaginary line, but is not okay when you step foot over the other imaginary line,
Yeah.
should make everyone's bullshit meter be going off so fucking
Yeah.
hard that it's
So
alarming. But it doesn't. It's just weird, you know?
so on that note, for those individuals that are in that space, is the best practice to get like the bio thing, like the geo thing you were talking about, and just be mindful. And it's kind of, it is what it is. Is there anything to be worried about? Is there a way for them to make sure they're not getting fentanyl? I guess.
Oh yeah, 100%. Yeah, like I would say for those kind of individuals, like on an energy level, yeah, biogeometry will work great for that. You can get the clearing tray and the charging plate, and if you're getting cannabis of unknown origin, you can leave it on the clearing tray for 10 minutes and the charging plate for 10 minutes, and that will at least tell you that like you're doing the due diligence necessary to make sure it's not like uploaded with cartel energy or whoever knows, right, where it's coming from.
Yeah.
The other thing, though, is like with the lacing of things, that's what makes things very dangerous. There's not really a way that I know to remediate that or to even tell without like having some type of fentanyl test strip or something like that. That definitely happens out there. Like it's not as rampant as the news makes it want to seem, but it does happen. And I want people to be very aware of that.
Mhm.
One thing I'll tell everyone right now, and this might be shocking to some people, but I feel like it's my duty to share it, is that I don't recommend anyone buy cannabis from the street anymore because of the issue you just mentioned, right? Now,
Yeah.
again, if you know someone who's growing and like, whatever, that's fine. But like if
Yeah.
you're getting it from God knows where, especially if you're in a big city like Texas or somewhere near the border, you
Yeah.
got to be really careful because there are people that are doing that kind of stuff. So right now in America, there is a loophole that I will fill everyone in on.
Mhm.
So we know that hemp is federally legal in this country. Cannabis is federally illegal. They're the same fucking plant. That's one of the biggest red pills that people can swallow in this too. They're the same plant, right? Hemp is just cannabis that has 0.3% of delta 9 THC or under. Now, think about this, right? There's two cannabinoids that people get confused a lot: THCA and delta 9 THC. So the DEA, right, and the powers that be, if you will, the lawmakers, etc., they know delta 9 THC as like the bad guy, the culprit, right? So to them, they're like, as long as something doesn't have 0.3% or over 0.3% of delta 9 THC, we're fine with you guys selling it as hemp, right? What they don't realize is that all THC before it has been decarboxylated is THCA. So if you go into a dispensary right now, like you walk into any of your medical dispensaries and you look at the THC amounts and you look at the test result, it'll say 24% THCA. If you
Mhm.
look at delta 9 THC, it'll be super low, like negligible. So what people are doing now is they're selling THCA flower, which is straight up just cannabis, but it's legal because it's 0.3% of delta 9 THC or under. So for anyone listening who's living in a state where you're like, I don't know where I can get my stuff, I have no idea what's in it, etc., go on Google, search THCA flower, go on Reddit, see what suppliers are, really good, and then order it, and lawfully and legally it will get shipped right to your door as hemp, because it is hemp technically by the law that the lawmakers instructed. And so no one has to just go through a random source anymore. Everyone can know. Now, the thing is, you won't know what energy the person who grew it with, right? Like that part biogeometry can still help with, but you'll know it won't be laced. So that's what I would say to everyone.
Huh. Fuck, man.
Yeah.
I want to dive into that more now, but I know we got to get going, and I want to make sure that we take time to talk about Breathe with Cannabis.
Hmm.
So yeah, man, tell the people about Breathe with Cannabis real quick.
Yeah, dude, Breathe with Cannabis is one of the funnest things I've ever been a part of in my life, because one of the biggest things that I hear from people that, might have a little bit of confusion when I talk about cannabis as a psychedelic or these kind of things is they're like, what are you talking about, man? I've been using cannabis for years, and I
Mhm.
was this person. I remember when I was 19, I got into a pretty intense argument in one of my psychology classes with a teacher who was trying to tell me cannabis was a psychedelic. And
Mhm.
me and like all the stoner kids in class were like, that's bullshit. We've never, like, I had never tripped at that point. So I had no
Mhm.
idea the context of a psychedelic. But
Mhm.
cannabis is a psychedelic, right? It's just been normalized to death. And so most people don't think it is.
Mhm.
And also, most people don't actually work to make it a psychedelic, right? They just try to numb out with it. And so In Breathe with Cannabis, it's a great opportunity for anyone who's like, I don't know if I believe cannabis is a psychedelic, to come out and say, hey man, don't trust me. Come to the workshop and experience it for yourself.
For those interested in learning more about Breathe with Cannabis, follow the link in the description.
And so once a month, we do our virtual workshops. The one you came to was the relationship edition. We got the purpose edition coming up on March 14th. And it's just so fun, man. It's a 2.5-hour experience. We open it up with Aaron hosting a meditation, like you mentioned, and doing a beautiful, like, contextual wisdom teaching for that month's theme to really give people the awareness of what we're doing in the workshop. Then he passes the mic over to me, and we do the journaling prompts and a little bit of integrated family systems with cannabis. And we do the first journaling prompt in a sober state, the second one in an altered state, so that people can really tell, like, who am I and what is accessible in a sober state, and who am I and what is accessible in an altered state. That way people are able to better use discernment and realizing, like, you know what? Cannabis and productivity, not that great for me. But cannabis and creativity, oh, I found that works well. Now they can be better, rest assured, to have a healthy relationship with the plant. So then after that, we pass the mic to Chris, and he guides us on 45 minutes of breath work, which, like you experienced, man, it's next level. He makes all this stuff with a guy named Johnny Buffalo, who is an incredibly classically trained musician. He makes all the guitar, the feminine vocals, the breath sounds over the music, the binaural beats, the solfeggio frequencies. It is epic, man. And so all you have to do, right, for anyone who's going to come is just show up with a curiosity cap on, a pen and paper, and get brought on an amazing experience, listen to some great tunes, have a blast, and be a part of this community. And then we do live ones too. We do them in person. We're doing one March 30th at Aubrey Marcus's farm in Lockhart, Texas. And then we're doing another one a week later at a music festival called Confluence. We're doing it on the main stage there. And the cool thing about that festival is it's happening around the solar eclipse. So when we're all there, we'll be seeing a full solar eclipse together, which is epic. I've seen one before. And so that's what Breathe with Cannabis is. And then we have the Conscious Cannabis Collective, which we're relaunching. We just made 2 new courses for it. It's epic. That's our more, like, lengthy container. Once people graduate that, they can go into our certification program and get certified as a cannabis coach and facilitator. And it's just super fun, man. We have an absolute blast with it. We joke often that we have the most fun homework on the internet, bar none. So yeah, man, it's a blast. I love what I do, and I'm so grateful to be able to do it and really bring more people into this, because cannabis really is the people's plant, man. It's the plant that any of us can learn how to utilize for personal and spiritual growth in our lives. So it's super fun.
Fuck yeah, dude. That's amazing.
Hell yeah.
Well, we could go for another 30 minutes super easily, man. I know you got to get going. So, dude, thank you so much for hanging out again today.
Dude, thank you for having me, man. I'm always down to come back on. I love riffing with you. I think it's so important that all of us that are doing this stuff get together more and more often, start figuring out, like, hey, what are you figuring out that works? What are you figuring out that works? How do we bring everything together? Because that is what true cannabis culture is, man. Like, that's how I knew the industry was completely silly for the most part. Like, again, there are really amazing people in the industry too. I don't want to generalize, but a lot of it is just like real estate people and finance people that totally miss the mark on what cannabis culture is, right? Like, for me, cannabis culture has always been about bringing people together, bringing me more into myself, and allowing that deeper connection with myself to foster deeper connection in others, and allowing their deeper connection to foster deeper connection in others, and having this really positive ripple effect, and going to light up the world together, man. So always happy to come on.
Dude, so are you cool to hang out for 2 more seconds after this?
Of course. Let's do it.
All right, cool. Yep. So in closing remarks, to summarize everything, wherever you are with cannabis, the most important thing is your relationship with yourself. Yes. And that might sound selfish to deeper parts of yourself, but the only reason it sounds selfish is because we've been conditioned to feel that way. In reality, the more you take responsibility for your own emotional intelligence and how you relate to yourself and cultivate that relationship, the more authentically you show up to those around you. And if there's any negativity around cannabis, you can alchemize that. So, dude, thanks again so much. And for everybody else, until next time. Just you white in me again. Just you white. You'll be sorry that your tears will be too light. Just you white in me again. Just you white. You'll be sorry.